Tonight on Bridge City News, Stats Canada's come out with a list of which provinces lead the way when it comes to marijuana consumption. We will tell you where Alberta ranks. A flu shot clinic took place at Exhibition Park today. We asked residents of Lethbridge if they still believe in getting flu shots. And we have dramatic footage of the devastation left behind from Hurricane Michael, which slammed into the U.S. East Coast. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Tomorrow is a big day in our country. October 17th is when recreational use marijuana becomes legal. So far, the City of Lethbridge has issued 23 development permits for cannabis retail stores in our area. City officials say, however, that before a permit can be issued, Alberta gaming and liquor licenses have to be granted. The province has kicked in with just over $11 million to help municipalities with bylaws and law enforcement. Lethbridge Mayor Chris Bierman says he's concerned that our city may not be getting enough of the pie.
What we are encouraged about is that there is some money coming to municipalities. We want to make sure that the revenues that the federal government and the provincial government collect are used to offset the costs. The costs have been downloaded to municipalities, so we will be responsible for enforcement. Things like saliva tests and other forms of enforcement for people who could be under the influence of cannabis. So we want to make sure that we're fully compensated for those costs.
When it comes to pot smokers, which province in Canada do you think leads the way per capita for having the most? BC? Ontario? No, according to a recent study from Stats Canada, it is Nova Scotia. BC actually came in second. The consumption of cannabis per year in Nova Scotia is just over 27 grams per person, which BC is close behind at 25 grams. Alberta, which was just over 24 grams, finished third. The lowest included the Territories, Nunavut at just under 14 grams, and the Northwest Territories at just over 15 grams. Saskatchewan was the lowest of the provinces, with a consumption rate coming in at 16.37 grams per person per year. Parks Canada has come out with its rules and regulations in regards to recreational use marijuana. Consumption of cannabis will be allowed at the campsites, but not in the common areas of the campground, including the playgrounds, kitchen shelters, washrooms, trails, or parking areas. Hikers in some provinces, including Alberta and BC, will be allowed to smoke on hiking trails and in the backcountry. Ski resorts within Banff National Park will have their own policies when it comes to the drug. Officials at Lake Louise Ski Resort say they will only allow cannabis where they currently allow smoking. The Organized Crime Reduction Minister says there is a consensus that a competitive price for legal pot is key to undercutting illicit cannabis sales. Bill Blair spoke today, a day before marijuana officially becomes legal nationwide.
Right from the outset, we've been engaged with provinces, territories, and also with the licensed producers because there is an acknowledgement that price is a determinant of how successful we might be. We have to be competitive with the illicit market, competitive not just in price, but in quality, choice, and in access. And so we are addressing all of those things. We have very purposely set what I believe to be a very low and responsible level of taxation for cannabis, and we have working with the provinces and territories. I think all of them, there is a consensus right across the country among the provincial and territorial distributors that the price has to be competitive, and that one of our significant public policy goals is the elimination of that illicit market that currently exists.
There was a big drug bust which took place in Medicine Hat recently. Last Friday, police seized close to $85,000 worth of cocaine and cash. One of the homes that was allegedly being used to sell drugs was beside an elementary school. The three people facing numerous drug charges are 32-year-old Curtis Roden, 37-year-old Leslie LaBelle, and 31-year-old Chris Simons. A reminder from police, if you see drug or gang-related activity in your neighborhood, to call Crime Stoppers right away at 1-800-222-TIPS. That's 1-800-222-8477. Work continues in our city to develop an effective municipal housing strategy. More than 200 responses were received, which asked Lethbridge residents about their thoughts on their current state of housing and areas where we need to improve. A task force, which includes Mayor Chris Bierman, was set up to understand and address housing needs in our city until the year 2025. The next stage of engagement will be reaching out to those who have experienced homelessness. The strategy is expected to be completed by March of next year. Streets Alive is asking the public to volunteer their time. The organization says it needs for extra bodies skyrockets around this time of year due to more programs. They're looking for people with a wide range of skill sets.
If you can fold a t-shirt, make coffee, cut things up, put stamps on things, if you can fill a bucket with water, if you can slice meat, if you can make a sandwich. People don't have to feel intimidated. that they have to work with the people that we serve, because that's not for everyone. But there's always ways to serve and to help us that are maybe a little bit more in the background.
Anyone interested can click the volunteer tab on streetsalive.ca or launch their own third-party effort to help the mission with some of its needs. Lethbridge College opened up its Centre Court today for victims of sexual violence. A number of organizations were set up along with a banner marked with the hashtag I Believe in You. Many wrote on the banner in support of those who've been victimized.
I'm hopeful that people who participate in our resource fair as well as the hunting grounds identify Lethbridge College as a supportive, healthy campus that will help to prevent sexual violence as well as support individuals who have experienced it, but also bringing our community agencies on campus, showing that our whole community is there to support them as well.
There's also viewing taking place on campus featuring the documentary Hunting Ground. That showing goes until 7 o'clock in the E.C. Fredericks Theatre. After the film, there will be a quick Q&A with a panel. Fire officials have determined that the fire at Cavendish Farms last Friday night was accidental. Firefighters were called to the Cavendish Potato Farms processing plant on 2-Way Avenue North Friday around 6:15 p.m. The fire was put out 3 hours later. Fortunately, there were no injuries. The investigation revealed the fire started in one of the French fry coating ovens. Cavendish Farms is in the process of building a new $350 million facility, allowing it to double its production capacity and to help reduce its carbon footprint. There was a lot of excitement at École Agnes Davidson this morning as they held the grand opening of a new state-of-the-art playground. The Davis Auto Group Little Kids Space opened today and was christened by many dignitaries, including MLA Maria Fitzpatrick and Mayor Chris Spearman, by a drag race on the new racetrack. The playground, which was designed and built by the Davis Auto Group, also features a gas station and a car wash. Superintendent Cheryl Gilmore explains why it's so important for local businesses to take interest in their own community.
In Lethbridge, as a school district, we are incredibly fortunate to have businesses like Pontiac Davis who take an interest in the spaces that children are in the city, that take an interest in the kind of programs. We have overwhelming support, and this is one example of an extraordinary example of support from a business that made a dream of having a play space for our younger children in this school come to fruition.
Today marks the beginning of the flu season. Flu shot clinics open up today, including this one at Lethbridge Exhibition Grounds. This year's flu strain is not expected to be as bad as previous years. However, Alberta Health Services is still encouraging residents to get the flu shot to help stop the spread of the flu virus.
We're wanting people to do everything they can to prevent getting the flu and spreading the flu. So vaccine obviously is our one method, and of course we're all still reminding people when you're sick, stay home, and cough into your sleeve and all those other things that help prevent the spread.
We get our flu shots every year because we know that these little guys are, they're defenseless. So we want to make sure that if he's going to catch a cold, that it's not going to be as bad. And we tried to make an appointment, but they're booking into November. So we came to the clinic instead to see if we could get in today.
Flu shots are available at flu clinics, through your family doctor, and at pharmacies across Alberta. Getting a flu shot can sometimes be a little controversial. There are those who strongly believe in the benefits it offers, while others are very anti-vaccine. So we took to the streets in Lethbridge today and asked, are you getting a flu shot this year?
Yes, I definitely am planning on getting a flu shot. I'm 75 years old and I want to take care of my health, and I think it's a really good preventative measure.
Absolutely not, because I don't see a point. Why would I enter something foreign into my body to prevent something foreign to enter my body? It's a natural thing. If you're going to get sick, you're going to get sick regardless. So,
been doing some reading up on it and some checking and getting the facts, and understand that I may not get sick, but I could be a carrier, and it could affect small children, some of the older population. So I really want to start doing it and get into the habit of it.
Definitely not. And the reason is because we don't know what's in that flu shot. And from everything that I've heard and every time I have taken it, it makes me sick. So something that's supposed to help us does not make us sick. So there's no way that I would ever put anything foreign in my body until I know what it's all about.
It was 100 years ago that the Spanish flu hit Alberta, claiming more than 4,000 lives. In recognition, a new exhibition is now set up at the legislature in Edmonton called Influenza, The Spanish Flu Comes to Alberta. It will be set up in the Borealis Gallery tomorrow through January 13th. The exhibition combines artwork and historical documents of the pandemic event. In 1918, the Spanish flu swept through the globe, killing up to 100 million people, including 50,000 here in Canada. It seems like more and more Canadians are visiting website databases to help them find long-lost relatives. David Rencher is the Chief Genealogy Officer with Family Search, and he says thanks to DNA research, we're able to reunite with family members.
Actually, with DNA, what it's giving you are all of these intricate family relationships, because you now have shared DNA with, of course, both sides of your family. And so what you're able to do basically is to triangulate on those and be able to trace down additional family members, because you know how they're related and which way they come in.
Watch my full interview with Dr. Rencher as we discuss how you can find out more about your ancestry coming up in the second half of our show. Lethbridge West MLA and Environment Minister Shannon Phillips blasted UCP leader Jason Kenney's plans to eliminate regulations and labor rules. Phillips says transparency is critical, so Kenney needs to explain what exactly will be cut should he be elected. The UCP is still consulting on the party's policy platform ahead of the spring election. Kenney recently told the Calgary Chamber of Commerce he would repeal labor rules enacted under the NDP that he says are hampering businesses. He says his party wants to cut bureaucratic red tape by a third. A Calgary MP has thanked medical staff who cared for his infant daughter and people who brought food and offered condolences after the girl's death. Tom Cummick's daughter, Lucy Rose, died in August when she was only 39 days old. Cummick choked back tears as he issued a member statement to talk about the experience. Lucy Rose died of trisomy 13. It is a genetic condition that leaves babies with severe intellectual and physical disabilities. New research says obesity surgery may dramatically lower the danger of heart attacks and strokes in people with diabetes. The study reinforces evidence that benefits extend beyond weight loss.
The main findings from this study were that patients who had weight loss surgery had a 40% lower risk of developing a heart attack or stroke in the 5 years after their procedure compared to people who got usual medical care for their diabetes. I think the main message for healthcare providers and patients is that anybody who has type 2 diabetes and severe obesity should be having a conversation with their provider about whether or not weight loss surgery is a reasonable treatment option for them for their diabetes. They usually talk about medical therapy such as pills and injections like insulin, but it's not always brought up that weight loss surgery is another available treatment option if the patient also happens to have severe obesity. But patients do need to know that some patients do need to have reoperations as they go along after their bariatric procedure to either improve the procedure or correct any sort of issues that come up after the procedure. And there are differences across the different procedures that are available. It's important to consider weight loss surgery as a treatment option, until we can really solve the challenge and really help figure out a way to help people make sustainable lifestyle changes in a regular way that really could reduce weight in this sort of the same magnitude of what you could see with weight loss surgery.
Tennessee District Attorney Brett Cooper says a mother and 4 children have been found dead inside of a home in the Maury County area. He says the group died in an apparent murder-suicide.
Well, we are currently at the Maury County Sheriff's Department, the EMS and the medical director, our examiner. We're currently investigating the deaths of 5 individuals, 4 being youth, 1 being an adult female, 3 juvenile females and 1 juvenile male at this time. Just so the public knows this, we don't believe that we have any type of suspect at large or anything like that. It looks horrible in this case, but we don't see anything that would lead us to believe that this was not an isolated incident inside the home with the victims that we're currently looking at right now.
Here's some dramatic footage the Bridge City News was able to obtain from the devastating hurricane which hit the U.S. East Coast. Drone aerial video from Mexico Beach, Florida shows a stretch of the town with virtually every structure destroyed. There has been 1 confirmed death so far in Mexico Beach, which Hurricane Michael nearly wiped off of the map. A recent earthquake and tsunami which hit Indonesia is now claimed more than 2,100 lives. More than 5,000 people are still unaccounted for. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, says a big reason why Indonesia was so unprepared was because of how little money the island nation put into emergency preparedness.
in Indonesia, it's a startling number of 0.002% of their budget annually goes towards any sort of emergency rescue funds. So you have you're already set back towards what you can do for your population. Even if everyone's flying in, sending over resources, you're never going to play catch up. You're never going to give the people what they need. And it seems like when you have experienced an earthquake of this magnitude, then naturally speaking, you are on a fault and you are in a place that is vulnerable to these types of catastrophes. And, it's a wake-up call.
Catch my full interview with Lisa discussing some of the biggest stories from around the globe, including the latest from a pastor who was released after 2 years in Turkish captivity. That's coming up after business news. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia's capital today. They discussed the disappearance over the alleged slaying of Washington Post and Saudi writer Jamal Khashoggi. Khashoggi disappeared 2 weeks ago during a visit to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. Khashoggi wrote critically about the Saudi Crown Prince in the Washington Post. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada is concerned about the disappearance of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
As I've expressed a number of times, our real concern on the reports coming out in the situation of this journalist. We're very much working with our allies in the international community to try and bring forward a concerted, or at least an aligned response as we learn more about the situation. It's still early days, and you don't want to make a mistake on this, but obviously this is something that has highlighted real concerns for an awful lot of people.
You know, instead of the Windy City, we should be called the Sunny City. Nothing but sunshine and amazing temperatures this week. I'll have a complete look at the weather forecast shortly. Another gorgeous day in our city with loads of sunshine. Tonight, mainly clear with a low near +1. Tomorrow, sunny with a high expected near 22. Thursday, clear sky with the mercury dropping a little to 17 degrees. Slightly cooler, but still sunny on Friday with a high near 13. Saturday, warming up once again. Lots of sunshine and a high near 21 is expected. Sunday, sunny and a high of 15. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 14 degrees and an average low of 0. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1963 at 27 degrees, and the record low was -11 in 1969. Sunrise was at 7:54, sunset at 6:40. Let's have a look at how tomorrow's shaping up across the country. Vancouver will be mainly sunny and 17, even warmer in Victoria on Wednesday, sunshine and a high of 19. A clear sky and 22 is on tap for Calgary. Edmonton will have loads of sunshine and a high of 20. Clearing in Regina with a high of 15 on Wednesday. Mainly sunny and 17 expected in Saskatoon. Winnipeg will be mainly clear and 5. Over in the central part of the country, Toronto should receive rain and a high of 8. Pretty much the same picture in our nation's capital in Ottawa. Showers and 9 is expected in Montreal. Over in the Maritimes, a good chance of rain in Fredericton, New Brunswick with a high of 11. Halifax, Nova Scotia will also receive more rain and a high of 11. Charlottetown, PEI under another wind warning today. Tomorrow, rain and a high is expected near 11 degrees. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, a good chance of drizzle with a high near 9 degrees. This is Small Business Week in Lethbridge. The number of small businesses in the city has grown significantly over the last few years, including Songer Architecture Incorporated. Elizabeth Songer opened the business in 2011 and is a member of the Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce. Songer says it was always a gamble opening up your own business, but it's really about taking a chance on yourself.
You can't sit and wonder and wish you knew what it would be like. You have to actually just dive in, be ready to not make a cent for the first little bit, and be ready to give your all to it. It's your baby. It needs to be nurtured, and you have to be ready for that commitment. But if you could be committed to it, it's so rewarding to be able to get into the full of it and start to grow yourself. It's very worth it.
The Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce will be honoring entrepreneurs in the city with its Business Awards that takes place on Thursday. For more information and tickets, visit lethbridgechamber.com. Federated Cooperatives Limited in Saskatchewan marked its 90th year in operation by closing down a block of downtown Saskatoon for a party yesterday. Although cooperatives in the province existed beyond the last century, they banded together in 1928. CEO Scott Banda says almost half of the province has a co-op membership. Last year, co-op topped $9.8 billion in sales. People looking to buy a home in Canada will be able to use the popular American real estate website Zillow. It is expanding into this country with Canadian listings that will include a home's list price, a description of the property, photos, and home facts. Zillow says it has agreements to receive more than 50,000 listings from Canadian brokerages and franchisors. Users will be able to use the Zillow site to search for Canadian for sale properties by postal code, city, or province. German authorities are fining the luxury automaker Audi $925 million US for selling cars with excessive diesel emissions. Prosecutors in Munich say the fine was imposed because Audi neglected its oversight duties in selling cars with engines made by Volkswagen and did not conform to legal limits. The case covered almost 5 million Audi cars sold in Europe and North America between 2004 and 2018. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, recreational use marijuana becomes legal tomorrow. So far, the city of Lethbridge has issued 23 development permits for cannabis retail stores in and around our area. City officials say, however, that before a permit can be issued, Alberta gaming and liquor licenses have to be granted. When you see news happening, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's top stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. A big reason why there were over 2,000 deaths from the Indonesian earthquake and tsunami is because the island nation was not properly prepared. That's according to our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, who has details coming up next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Are you interested in getting to know people from different cultures? Volunteer Lethbridge is holding information sessions on October 18th and 20th. Find out how you can make a difference in a newcomer's life by supporting their transition to Lethbridge. For more information, call Shelley at 403-332-4320 or email office@volunteerlethbridge.com. Playgoers of Lethbridge will present their annual dinner theater, Till Beth Do Us Part, from October 23rd to the 27th at Country Kitchen Catering. This show is a raucous comedy about romance and revenge. Tickets are $55 and are available at CASA. Come for some free family fun to the Boo Bash at Exhibition Park's West Pavilion, taking place Saturday, October 27th from 1 to 4 p.m. Kids will enjoy bouncy castles, face painting, a photo booth, and much more. The Lethbridge Association of the Blind provides numerous activities for the blind and visually impaired in the Lethbridge area. These events include dinners with entertainment, local museum tours, and much more. For more information, call 403-942-1677 or email brownwj@shaw.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
South Korea's president says North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is quite sincere about removing all of North Korea's weapons, but he also says that Kim wants to be rewarded for doing so. Joining me now from Los Angeles is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Lisa, what do those rewards actually look like for Kim? Is it an all-exclusive one-month stay in Disneyland? Maybe the keys to Las Vegas?
He wouldn't mind those things, right? You could see his spirit is very much childlike and juvenile. So, what's interesting here is North Korea being isolated for such a long time. You have this rogue dictator, and now he's got like a spokesperson in South Korea. The two met, and now South Korea is saying, listen, he's willing, but we're going to be the Hollywood agent now. He's going to need some stuff. You gotta pay up. He's not just going to, denuclearize for nothing. So it's an interesting situation. The two met. They seem to have hit it off, and South Korea seems to be confident in what North Korea could do and can denuclearize, but it's saying to the West, well, if you want that denuclearization, you're going to have to give something for it. But incorrectly going forward with this potential deal with North Korea, President Trump and I should say Washington will not remove any sanctions from North Korea until we see some signs of promise with denuclearization from the North Koreans, and then the shackles will be removed, not the other way around. And I think that that's what South Korea is hinting towards. You do it first, then we'll follow, but Trump's saying the other way around. And I mean, if we keep going like this, we're going to be going in circles. But I think there has to be some first initial steps by the North Koreans for us to see that we do have a partner in them and that we can trust them going forward.
European leaders are putting pressure on Saudi Arabia over the disappearance of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. Now, Turkey said he was murdered at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, but Saudi Arabia denies it altogether. Saudi Arabia also says it will retaliate against any sanctions placed on it over the Khashoggi case. Now, what kind of retaliations are we potentially talking about here?
Saudi Arabia doesn't want this story to be looked at as anything more than one isolated case, and that's probably because they had a hand in whatever happened. In the last few hours, we have heard that potentially Saudi Arabia will come forward with the story that he was murdered, but that this was an interrogation gone wrong. Meaning the royal family or King Salman probably wants to wash his hands of any responsibility of having ordered or having this come down the hierarchy and have him having ordered this murder, but to say that the employees at the consulate were the ones who, without any orders from the top, committed this on their own. Look, the details will emerge eventually, and we'll find out that he was murdered, and was murdered, in fact, probably at the consulate. Turkey wants answers, the United States wants answers, Europe wants answers, everybody wants answers on this. So it would be behoove the Saudis to come forward with some sort of story, especially right now since Secretary Pompeo is in Riyadh talking to the Saudis and probably applying some pressure, because neither side, not the United States and not the Saudis, want any consequences or any fallout, political fallout or economic fallout from this incident. We have a major arms deal with Saudi Arabia. We have a reset, a realignment in the Middle East where Donald Trump is more favorable towards the Sunni alliance in the Middle East rather than the Shiite alliance in the Middle East, which was favored by the Obama administration, in which we normalized relations with the Iranian regime. So right now, everyone's standing by this one story of this one isolated individual. Many are standing by to see what will the consequences of this be? What macro repercussions are we going to see down the line? And it seems like this will blow over. This is one individual. I think it's absolutely fair for people to demand answers from Saudi Arabia, from Turkey, to look into this, to see what this interrogation was. Turkey, rightfully so, wants answers. This happened on their soil. And Saudi Arabia has to provide those answers, both to the family of this journalist and to everyone else. The royal family has always played this two-sided, where they want it to play in global affairs. They want to see it at that table. But with regards to any threats to the royal family, they do take matters into their own hands. And I think King Salman definitely wants to give a better PR spin for the royal family, that they are more open and more flexible and more liberal in many ways, particularly with regards to human rights. But now when we see this story, I think people are wondering if it's going to have broader implications politically.
Lisa, a Christian was finally released from Turkey. Pastor Andrew Brunson, who had been detained over the last couple of years. Trump applauded the move, saying it will improve relations with their so-called frenemy.
Yeah, I've always called Turkey a frenemy too for years now, because there's always been this push and pull. We need Turkey, they need us. Geopolitically speaking, they're positioned in a place in the world where we need them as a kind of a footrest to go into the rest of the Middle East. They're helping us in the fight in Syria, although they have their own agenda in Syria against the Kurds. But there's always been this relationship where it's a love-hate relationship between Turkey and the United States, especially as of late. And no one's ever called Turkey out because of that other relationship, and that other symbiotic, I should say, relationship. Now that the pastor has been released, it's also interesting with regards to the timing of this Saudi journalist's disappearance, because Turkey's probably wondering, what does this mean for the next chapter of Turkey-U.S. relations? What does this mean for Turkey's future with its relationship with the West? And because President Trump has basically drawn this line in the sand with regards to where he stands, he pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal. He made a great significant deal with the Saudis with regards to arms sales. So where does Turkey fit into all of this? Turkey knows that it has a kind of a precarious future right now with regards to the future of the region. And I think right now, Turkey wants a major seat at that table in the conversation of the future of the Middle East, and with the release of this pastor, wants sanctions removed, wants all penalties removed, and to have that conversation about what will happen going forward.
When the new U.S. embassy is being built in Ankara, Turkey, it'll be on a street with a new name, the name of U.S. civil rights leader Malcolm X. Tell me more about that.
What a smart move by Erdogan, by the Turks, because, again, sticking a finger in the eye of the United States, who currently has what's perceived from the outside as internal struggle. There is an unsaid civil war going on inside the United States with regards to, pop culture movements and the Me Too movements and kneeling before the national anthem. And I think all of these issues point to the fact that other people are outside the United States are watching. So this sticks a finger in the eye of the United States and the problems that we're currently having, and perhaps attributing those problems to President Trump and saying, we're going to name this street Malcolm X to remind the United States that they still have a ways to go with regards to fixing, quote unquote, these societal issues.
Lisa, some good news coming out of Kabul. Taliban leaders say they will continue to have discussions with the U.S. peace envoy. Could we finally see some peace in Afghanistan?
This news comes right after another suicide bombing over the weekend reported that 22 people died in a suicide bombing. So, Hal, it's one day we get a piece of news like this where people want to sit down and they want to build the future of Afghanistan, but then we take 3 steps back with another suicide bombing where civilians are killed. It seems like there's no safe place in Afghanistan. These bombings are taking place in places where children are, where families are, where mothers are. So it's very unfortunate. It's very difficult to have any optimistic view on what could happen for the future of Afghanistan.
And you know what? I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, 20 people were killed, more than 40 injured over the weekend in Somalia thanks to the twin suicide bomb attacks. An Islamist militant group claimed responsibility, and a spokesperson for the terrorists say they targeted restaurants because many government troops were there.
Oh, it's awful. And this points to something that's not talked about too often, which is the growth of these terror insurgencies within the continent of Africa. No one ever talks about this. We talk about North Africa somewhat, where their influence is growing inside countries such as Egypt or Libya. We don't talk about the rest of the continent, where you have political vacuums and you have very vulnerable societies in which these groups can grow, they convert, they kill, they take sex slaves, they take young girls, abduct them, take them from their families, and really stunting the growth of these societies that already are exposed to other vulnerabilities with regards to growth. So here, just another example of much of that growth and terror.
Now, the numbers are in from the 7.5 magnitude earthquake and devastating tsunami which rocked Indonesia. Close to 2,100 dead, 5,000 still missing. A spokesperson for the National Disaster Mitigation Agency says Indonesia was not prepared. More money needs to go into their country's disaster response budget.
Oh, absolutely. So you have a place like Indonesia where the infrastructure is not prepared for this type of catastrophe. They will go back or use whatever money or resources they have or are getting towards repairing or at least rescuing those that they can. Look at the number of people still missing. Now, in Indonesia, it's a startling number of 0.002% of their budget annually goes towards any sort of emergency rescue funds. So you have you're already set back towards what you can do for your population. Even if everyone's flying in, sending over resources, you're never going to play catch up. You're never going to give the people what they need. And it seems like when you have experienced an earthquake of this magnitude, then naturally speaking, you are on a fault and you are in a place that is vulnerable to these types of catastrophes. And it's a wake-up call. I think Japan experienced their earthquake tsunami, and they quickly learned and became prepared and put their resources towards that emergency preparedness. And I think Indonesia has to attempt to do the same.
Iran's President Rouhani says the relationship between Iran and the U.S. is at its worst in 40 years. It's never been this bad. Rouhani says the U.S. wants to see a change with the Iranian leadership, with their regime, but Washington, well, they're kind of denying that claim, Lisa.
Yes, leaders within Washington, Secretary Pompeo, John Bolton, President Trump, Nikki Haley, when she was still at her post at the UN, reiterated that the United States is not after a policy of regime change, meaning to remove the current regime from Iran, and that they are after behavioral change. They want to see actual significant change from the regime in Iran, not putting money towards terror, not imprisoning victims of human rights abuses, not sticking their finger into different crises around the world, such as in Syria or in Yemen or in Lebanon or in Iraq, and truly having a conversation about denuclearization or not going towards certain parts of their missile program. These are conversations that the Iranian regime does not want to have. Instead, they want to continue to flex their muscles and to speak their propaganda pieces. It doesn't matter what the United States is after. We know what the Iranian regime's platform has been. And right now, why do they think that this has been the worst in 40 years? Why? Because A, you have a president in the United States who's calling them out on it, who withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal and is not going to play by the same rules as our previous president. And B, more importantly, the Achilles heel of the Iranian regime is and always has been the Iranian people. The Iranian people have finally become fully cognizant of what their government is doing, where the money is going, and why they have to suffer for it. If there's sanctions, the burden of those sanctions are passed on to the people, not to the government. And when the people are suffering, they're able to come out onto the streets. And when they come out onto the streets, that's when the regime feels threatened. So I think when President Rouhani speaks about this being the worst time, it's because they truly feel that squeeze, whether it's from the international community or right at home with people protesting on the streets.
An Egyptian court upheld death sentences of 3 suspected Islamists who face charges of killing at least 10 police officers. Lisa, the crackdown continues now that a new regime took over from the now banned Muslim Brotherhood.
Right. So this is a very interesting story in Egypt that continues. It's a very nuanced story. So you have in Egypt now a new administration that has been very much against the Muslim Brotherhood, any terrorism, any growth of any terror insurgencies, a zero tolerance policy, which is wonderful. And that's an ally that we can now rely on in the Middle East. At the same time, under this guise of getting rid of all sorts of terror threats, the government's also getting rid of any threats to itself, very similar to what we're seeing in Saudi Arabia. So, we can't have this wholesale, basically whitewashing of all government officials to be very pro-government. So if you have anyone who speaks out against the government, whether it's a TV station or a newspaper or policemen or judges or teachers, can't round them up. That's what we saw in Turkey. That's what we saw in Saudi Arabia. And that's what we saw in the aftermath of the Iranian revolution 40 years ago. So this is what we've seen in the Middle East. They round them up and they surround themselves with those who agree with them so that their rule is never in jeopardy. They have no risk of regime change or toppling of the regime. And that's what Egypt is doing right now. They're making sure that they trust everyone around them, that they're not in any risk of being overthrown. and that they can create some sort of stability with like-minded people around them. So that's why we see a lot of arrests, we see a lot of imprisonment, and hopefully it's only for the bad guys, the terror suspects, and not for those who are living their lives and doing their jobs.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks a lot, Lisa.
My pleasure.
Genealogy seems to be an increasingly popular activity in society as families trace back their family roots and history. Is it just a fun activity, or there may be some practical benefits to it? Joining me now via Skype from Salt Lake City, Utah, is David Rencher, Chief Genealogy Officer with Family Search. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Well, thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Well, you bet. Now, why is family tree research so important and so popular with people nowadays?
Well, I think everybody discovers that they have a story. I think they've been seeing it on TV and on television programs, and they see the fun and the joy that other people are having. And what they really learn is everybody has a story, right? And so all of our ancestors are they've come here one way or another. How did they get to Western Canada, for example? You know, what were the trails? What did they endure to get there? What did they endure once they settled? And so all of these families have stories. And so it just becomes a lot of fun to investigate and to learn. And sure enough, everybody has a story.
Well, where you are in Salt Lake City, Utah, there's a huge Mormon influence, and just outside of Lethbridge here as well. In Cardston, we have quite a few Mormons as well.
Yes, yeah. Early settlers came to this valley in 1847. From here, they branched out. Some of them did go north to Cardston. And so they settled those areas, and it's been booming ever since.
So, David, what are the big benefits to actually tracing your ancestry? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think a lot of it is it helps give you self-identity. And I think these days, with the complexion of families and family relationships, there are a lot of people discovering connections that they didn't know about before. I have a number of half-siblings, for example. I think I've still got one out there somewhere that I don't know. So, you know, every once in a while, I open up my DNA results and hope that they've tested and see if we can connect. So there are many opportunities to learn and understand more about your family.
So when you do the genealogy search, how detailed does it really get? Can we discover what occupation a relative had, maybe back in the 1600s, or their religious beliefs were, maybe even their political leanings, left or right?
So there are a lot of factors. We call those genealogical identifiers because they take people, for example, of the same name. So let's say that there were two Robert Millers. How do I determine which Robert Miller is the one that I'm trying to identify, right? Well, I'm looking for the one that was a carpenter in this city, this locality at this time period. And I'm not looking for the one that was a butcher in this city at this time period. And so that's how I begin to distinguish, is with those genealogical identifiers. So yes, you can learn a lot about what's going on there, and then coupling that with just the history of the area, you get a sense of what life was like for them in the 17th century even.
My wife said a long time ago, she did the same thing, checked out our genealogy, and she says, I come from a family of horse thieves. I said, had I only known that, you know? Now, at what point in history did society first started using last names? You talked a bit about millers. You know, they used to work the mill in their town and city. That's how they came up with that name. Tell me a bit about that history.
So surnames are an interesting thing. Actually introduced into England with the Normans in 1066. And so they began, again, to be able to distinguish. So the interesting thing is there's kind of a mirror image going on with surnames, whereas in England, for example, as you suggested, surnames became something that were an identifier with something that the person did. So they were a miller, or, you know, they were a blacksmith, may have been shortened to black or shortened to Smith or something of that nature. The interesting thing is when we settled North America, it was the reverse. Cities and towns were named after the individual who settled the town. And so in many instances, for example, Winslow becomes named after someone with the surname Winslow. Whereas
Winslow, Arizona. Such a fine sight to see. It's a girl, my lord. And I'm sorry, that's an old Eagles classic. But
and I even knew the girl.
So there was a Chicago and a Boston too?
So all of these types of things, sometimes they were after other cities, but many of these cities were just named after people with that particular surname who settled the area. So you almost get this mirror image between the old country and the new.
Now, with surnames as well, I was talking with one of our video journalists, Jake, and he was saying that in Scotland, you know, somebody who's the son of Fergus, it became Ferguson, like when they came to North America.
Yes, Yeah, it's a naming custom that we call a patronymic. And so that happened also in the Nordic countries, Denmark, Sweden, Finland. Those areas, you were also getting patronymic naming patterns, as well as in Wales. And so it's not uncommon for that to come that way. And so just because you're looking for a Jensen doesn't mean that all of the Jensens are related.
Now, people sometimes change their surnames over the years. Why and how does that happen?
It may go back to that horse thief thing that you were talking about. They are trying to escape something. But a number of people, they wanted to melt into society a little more. They wanted to integrate. They didn't want to sound like they were necessarily from a particular ethnic group or something of that nature. And so in some instances, they shortened it, or they didn't know how to spell it. And so they chose something that was easy to spell. While there are a lot of stories about names changing, I think more frequently what we see are spellings changing. And that comes from people not knowing how to write their names and how to deal with learning how to write their name and how to sign their name.
What's interesting too, I've talked to people that came over from Germany, and there were some Millers, M-U, mit die zwei Umlaut, or the two dots above the U, L-L-E-R, and it's Miller in Germany, but in Canada it's Muller. And I talked to some of these people that had that last name, and they said, we hated the sound of Muller, so we put an E in to make it Mueller. It just sounded a little bit better, right?
Right. Yeah, so there are a number of instances like that where and that's why you look for spellings that are the same, and that's why these other genealogical identifiers become very important, because then all of the other people associated with that family, suddenly if you find a person with a variant in the spelling of the surname, but the wife's name is the same, the children's names are the same, they're in the correct birth order, they're the correct ages, then you begin to sort the pieces out and say, hey, I think this is my guy and I think he changed his name.
So David, how do you start if you want to trace back? Where do you look for your ancestry records then?
Well, we always say start with what you know. And in many families, there is a particular family member that has done a little bit of research, and you want to talk to them because odds are they've gathered some of the family data and some of the family stories. Sometimes there's a family Bible. Then it's pretty easy to connect to more recent records. So 20th century census records, easy to find your family in those. And as you look, then each piece leads you to the next piece. We always say, where does the trail lead, okay? Well, if I see them in this census, then maybe they're in the census 10 years earlier, and 10 years earlier than that. And pretty soon you've got a trail there. Did they die and leave a will? Well, were all the children named in the will? Now I have the context of a family group that fits the nature of what I'm looking for. So I think just over time, there's a lot of little pieces, little breadcrumbs, if you will. And honestly, that's what's intriguing, I think, to a lot of people. A lot of people who like jigsaw puzzles really like genealogy.
Now, are old newspaper articles and maybe obituaries a little helpful as well?
Newspapers are extremely helpful for a variety of reasons. Any of our ancestors could end up in the newspaper for any number of reasons. Dying in an unusual way was news. So killed by an accident, the details of the accident spelled out in the newspaper. Someone who deserted from military service, suddenly in the newspaper. Someone who commits a crime. Of course, that's none of our ancestors. But those others, who have criminal ancestors.
Well, like horse thieves, for instance. Yes, right.
Yes, those people. Right. So there are a number of different things that would happen. Obituaries are extremely useful because so often in an obituary, they'll talk about other family members and where they went. And so as the family spreads out and migrates and takes up land opportunities elsewhere, those kinds of things are extremely useful to come up with place names in obituaries. So extremely valuable.
So how about physical travel? Do people, to get out a lot of research, do they maybe visit grave sites or travel back and forth to towns where records may be kept?
Genealogical tourism is actually a pretty big industry. It's bigger than most of the travel industry even realizes. And there are a lot of people that travel and they kind of quietly go in and out of town, but they do visit cemeteries. There's some really cool things going on with cemeteries these days. There are apps out there where you can actually take pictures of grave sites and it puts a GPS pin dot right there on the grave site so that you can walk right to it. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of going into a cemetery. You're suddenly looking at 4,000 flat headstones and you haven't a clue where your family's buried. But with these apps, if somebody's been there and imaged the stone, you can walk right to it. And so that's what a lot of people going out, having a lot of fun as they travel and do that kind of work.
So how far can someone actually trace back their family?
Realistically, not uncommon to be able to trace them back into the 1600s, possibly the 1500s. A lot depends on record destruction, wars, conflicts, all those kinds of things. Sometimes you just have to really get lucky that the records survive.
Now, more and more people today are using DNA and DNA tests to trace back family roots. What does a DNA test actually reveal?
So DNA is like the new kid on the block, and it's everybody's best new friend. A lot of people think that the only thing that you get from a DNA kit is an ethnicity map, which tells you the percentages of German or the percentage of Nordic or Swiss or something like that. But actually with DNA, what it's giving you are all of these intricate family relationships, because you now have shared DNA with, of course, both sides of your family. And so what you're able to do basically is to triangulate on those and be able to trace down additional family members, because you know how they're related and which way they come in. There's some fun tools out there. One's like a chromosome painter, right? And so it tells you which piece of your chromosome comes from which ancestor. Which
So
that
the
gets pretty
majority,
cool.
would you say the majority of people have a combination of ethnic backgrounds, or do we still have some people that have 100% DNA from one ethnic or racial background?
100% is really tough to come. Mine isn't anywhere close to that. My wife's, however, is 94% British. And so that's really high. I like to joke she's more British than the Queen. But,
Well, the Queen has some German ancestry with her as
she
well.
does. That's why my wife's more British than her.
Yeah. Now, how accurate are the DNA tests?
So DNA tests are, the samples are measured against what are called reference panels. Reference panels are the samples that they go out and they gather a number of samples from a specific geographic area. And then they're measuring your DNA against those samples. And so that reference sample is supposed to be representative of the people from that area. If the reference sample is flawed in some way, then it doesn't accurately reflect your ancestry. So for example, let's say that you believe and have been told all your life that the majority of your ancestors were German, and you get your DNA result back and it shows like 26% German, and you look at it and you go, what is going on here? It's probably a deficiency in the reference sample. They continue to update those. Ancestry.com, for example, just upgraded their reference samples, and a bunch of people's percentages changed. But as they test more and more people, it's going to get more and more effective. And now remember too, that we're only testing against other living people in those areas today, because we're not testing against your actual ancestors who lived there hundreds of years ago. We're testing against descendants of people in that same country who were there.
So do you have people who were adopted, for instance, doing family research, or does that become a little bit more of a challenge?
We have a lot of adoptees doing family history research. I'm an adoptee. It was, I have been able to do a lot of research over the years, and so I had discovered a lot of this information on my own. But recently, taking one of my DNA tests, when the results came up, if I had not found one of these half-siblings before, she was the first match in my DNA result. So that would have been the point at which I learned that I had this half-sibling that I didn't know about. So a lot of adoptees are hoping for that. Like I say, I still have a half-sibling out there that I hope tests and that I learn and that we can connect. But the adoptees are getting a lot of benefit from this.
Yeah, this must be a cool way of reuniting families. What kinds of surprise findings have people encountered?
Well, the surprise findings usually center around what we call non-parental events, which means that one or the other parent isn't who they thought it was. So in other words, when they test, their father isn't who they thought their father was, or something of that nature. It's usually the father. But in some instances, it's both parents. I mean, they're finding out their parents never told them they were adopted, for example, and now they're testing and they're finding out, no, that doesn't match either parent.
Now, what's interesting about your website when it comes to genealogy, it's free if people want to check out all the information, right?
it is free, and it's we've got like 5.7 billion names on there. You can search them. We post on average about 1.3 to 1.6 million names per day on the site. And so there's a lot of new data. It's powered by a lot of volunteers doing a lot of indexing, and it is free because we're a not-for-profit organization funded by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Wow. David Rensher, Chief Genealogy Officer with the Family Search. Thanks a lot for joining me today.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Have a great night.